Okay. Merry Christmas Eve. Since this is Christmas, I'm going to make this really short, but I think this sermon is one of a very important one that we need to understand. And it has a lot to do with math and logic of math. Whenever we talk about this whole idea, we hear of government saying that trickle down economics, if we fund things at the top, all that money is going to trickle down. We can look at that from a manufacturing perspective and see that such a thing does not exist. If I take, for example, if I have a product and it's $6 royalty for a shirt, and I sell that product and I have a small consumer base, then I'm only going to be able to make a small amount of money on that $6. But if I have a large global consumer base and everyone is buying that shirt and I get $6 for each of that shirt purchase, then that $6 times that massive global a consumer buying population, when it trickles down to or trickles to me as a single source. So if we have a huge population and it's down here, we consider this down, and we have me up at the top because I'm the producer of the product, and everybody is paying $6, and that trickles up to that single source. That $6 is going to make a massive amount of wealth because money trickles up, it never trickles down. And so, one of the parables that we have in the Bible that talks about this, I think the best, is found in Luke. Give me a second. Sorry, with Christmas, it just kind of everything is a little bit chaotic, and me not being as prepared as I had hoped to be. Is the one about the rich man and Lazarus. And I'm just going to read that for you. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus who was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And so we have this situation of this poverty person, this Lazarus man, who is sitting outside the gates and looking at this rich man who has this massive amount of food at his table and would just be happy enough with the crumbs. That, my friend, is trickle down economics, where people take their portion and whatever is left then trickles down to the rest of us. That is trickle down economics. And it's not something that government should be sponsoring as good for their citizens, because that is where everyone who's at that top of the government and all the investors and all the funders are taking their share. And then things are starting to trickle down to the rest of us. And that's sort of what we saw with that stimulus bill, where everything was to the of the people that are controlling the government, and then whatever was left over from our own taxes was trickling down to us as our tax benefit. And so that was a situation right here. We can see trickle down economics in this parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And here is what God feels about that. And it came to pass, the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades he lifted his eyes, being in torment, and seeth Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. So where we had this person with extravagant amount of wealth who had the opportunity to help Lazarus while he was living, yet refused to, not even giving him crumbs, or, not giving him nothing. Now Lazarus has been taken away to heaven, and we see this rich man who's in torment in hell, begging for Lazarus, the guy that he saw as nothing, as beneath him, as not even worth the crumbs that he would give his dog, now being the one that he's praying to God to come and relieve his burdens. Just a tip of, water tipped in, finger tipped in water, because the pain and excruciation is so bad. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he's comforted, and thou art tormented. So the things that we do here on earth, we are going to see later on. Even if we don't see justice and, getting our karma for it here on earth, it will come to us eventually. And beside all this, between you us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they who would not pass from here to you cannot, and neither can they pass to us that would come from there. And then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. That passage makes me think of the Christmas story. You know, Ebenezer Scrooge, who's going around and he's foreclosing on mortgages and kicking people out and evicting people out of their homes during Christmas. And he gets visited by the spirits. That's what that passage makes me think about whenever he's begging for the father, Abraham, to send these spirits to his brethren to warn them of what's going on. And that is the premise of Charles Dickens' The Christmas Story, where we have these spirits and they take him through his life and they show him why he ended up being the way he was, and the ripple effect that he ended up having, not only the ripple effect on the people in his own community and his own family relations, but the butterfly effect he had on his workers, and especially his worker's son, because economics works like that. There's ripple effects and there are butterfly fly effects. If you do not invest in the people that are working for you, then that hardship is going to create in that lack of investment. If we don't invest in our community and in our schools and in our children of today, that hardship is going to affect their lives later on. And in that hardship affecting their lives, the entire community gets affected in return. So it becomes that bitter butterfly and ripple effect of economics. And we can see that here in this parable. For I have 5, and Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. So now we're starting to understand that, okay, here's this guy asking someone to send them from the dead. And that, goes back into the actual Christmas story, the beginning of the Christmas story, the birth of the person who is going to be the messenger, who is going to come back from the dead. And he said unto him, they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. So this parable is Christ telling the people who are listening to them, he knows everything that's going to happen because he is the Son of God, and God knows everything that's going to happen. And we see in these parables lessons that we can learn today in our own lives as governments are seeking to remove a tax burden from something that is able to handle a massive amount of taxes. Because as we go back to that manufacturing idea, that if you are a manufacturing company, especially if you're a distribution company and you're producing a product and the product is being bought all over the world. For example, Alibaba had I think it was a 3 billion profit gain in just one day of the Chinese single, I think it was a Chinese single day. And if you take that taxes from that $1 billion profit and you invest into a nation, and you do that with all your corporations, you're going to see the financial burden of taxes is going to be alleviated on the individuals. But if you remove that tax burden from the corporations and the factories who are able to handle it, and even giving them the title of a legal person under Citizens United, they are no longer paying and doing their fair share. They're no longer paying into a system that they're profiting off of. And the fact that people who are feeding into this system are the ones who are getting hurt, so they can no longer feed that system anymore. You hurt your consumers, they can't buy the products anymore. I'm going to end it with Federalist 12, because our founding fathers actually spoke about this whenever they were talking about trying to create that U.S. Constitution that was going to be a peace treaty trade agreement of all the states, so that it would end these bickerings and potential civil wars that could happen over the resources. And so he was making this case on the taxes whenever he's talking about how it would work. Here we go. So he says the ability of a country to pay taxes must always be proportioned in a great degree to the quantity of money in circulation. Again, it makes sense. and to the celerity from which it circulates. It has to flow through the government. It has to flow in a government being not only the government branches, but the people that make up the government. And so, commerce contributing to both these objects must of necessity render the payment of taxes easier and facilitate the requisite supplies to the treasury. Commerce has to contribute to the treasury. And how do they do that? Well, if their commerce is coming from overseas, they have to contribute through those export and excise taxes, the duties. They have to contribute through the duties. And those duties then supply for the US Treasury, and the US Treasury is then used for the operational costs necessary to run a government. And then they talk about, they give a little examples of other countries and why it needs to be this way. But it's not in this aspect of the subject alone that union will be seen to conduce to the purposes of revenue. There are other points of view in which its influence will appear more immediate and decisive. It is evident from the state of the country, from the inhabitants of the people, from the experience we have had on the point itself, that it is impractical to raise any very considerable sums by direct taxation. Tax laws have in vain been multiplied. New methods to enforce the collection have in vain been tried. The public expectation has been uniformly disappointed, and the treasuries of the states have remained empty. The popular system of administration inherent in the nature of popular government, coinciding with the real scarcity of money, incident to a languid and mutilated state of trade, has hitherto defeated every experiment for extensive collections, and has at length taught the different legislators the folly of attempting them. He goes on to say, the pockets of the farmers, on the other hand, will reluctantly yield but scanty supplies in the unwelcome shape of impositions on their houses and lands, and personal property is too precarious and invisible a fund to be laid hold of any other way than by the imperceptible agencies of taxes on consumption. If we just tax consumption, we end up hurting the consumers who are buying the products and then also having to pay taxes on the products. So this whole entire Federalist 12 is talking about it, and I think it ends up saying, and I'm just remembering it from memory, that every penny saved, every shingle that's saved for that government leaders is going to be taken out of the taxpayers' pockets. So if we take that idea and we see that governments should not be operating on this trickle-down economics of everybody gets theirs at the top and it trickles down to whatever's remainder for the rest of us. We can also look at this as a trickle-down economics theory that's been happening in our own churches, where churches are not contributing in taxes, where they feel that if they donate to the causes of nonprofits as a tax-exempt donation, that they will somehow be funding the poverty of the world, when in fact, if they contributed, if they did not participate in trickle-down economics and instead realized that economics, everything trickles up, if they contributed into their tax system of their communities and of their states and of their federal governments, they would find that their money, when combined with the collective money of all the churches around the nation and the world, would do far more good for alleviating poverty and feeding people and taking care of their needs than any kind of organization that's out there that's supposed to be doing those things. God does not endorse trickle-down economics. We are supposed to be contributing everything that we are given. You know, we look at this and we say, oh, we're just supposed to give a tenth, tithe, a tenth of our money to the church. What does God need with money whenever he controls everything in the universe and everything is his? We give 10% of our time. That is going to be far more valuable than us giving 10% of our income to a church. If we give 10% of our income to creating something that alleviates burdens of poverty and shows people through our actions exactly what a Christian looks like, somebody who does exactly what Christ did, where he went out into the crowds. He did not stand on these pedestals. He reached the people to where they are, and he healed the sick. He took care of the needs. He comforted the scared and the lost. He helped people. That is what Christ did. and he advocated for those who everybody ignored. He did not look at people as though they were an abomination of God. He did not look at sins as though they were abomination of God. He did not look like women, especially women who were adulterers, as abominations of God. He saw them as useful messengers to take his message and bring to people all over their community. He saw the value in people that our nation and our society often looks at as abominations of God or not worth anything. If we want to truly represent Christ as we talk about his birth at Christmas, if we truly want to understand this baby who was neglected and cast out by society at his birth, who had his parents not had to pay taxes, would not have been Bethlehem in the first place. We can see the role of taxes that have played on Jesus's life, and we can understand why he would say, render to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Pay the government its dues, and render to God what is God, because those things are not considered the same. God does not need our money. People do. People need it to be able to have food for their tables and for their kids, and education for their kids, and clothing for their kids and for their families. Churches should not be advocating trickle down economics with governments, and churches should not be advocating during a time of COVID to take more money for themselves that's supposed to go for the people who are suffering, to use our Supreme Court system for that kind of purpose in order to keep your churches extravagant and decked with gold is not what churches should be doing right now. They should be looking to see what the need is, and if it costs you everything, that is the responsibility that you have taken up as a pastor, as a leader, as a sage for God. When we look at Christmas, we have to understand exactly what it is that we are celebrating. It's not the merchandise. It's not the accumulation of wealth and gifts. It's a baby, a tiny little child who was rejected at his birth and rejected at his death and rejected all throughout the course of his life. But he never gave up on his mission of love and grace for the world, the mission of God. Merry Christmas.